Now, the really cool thing about hosting this show is that it gives me a platform to interview some really cool and interesting facilitators. And our next guest is no exception. He's a computer science engineer and was working for Procter & Gamble as a project manager, then found a way to sneak humour into everything he did. He was amazed at the effort he made to get laughs in meetings or via an email created such a positive response. He now runs his own company called Humour That Works, and this company helps people to incorporate their own style of humour into their workplaces. In this interview, he explains why humour is so important and also shares his secrets on how you can start to use humour in all of your workplace interactions. This is a good one. Listen in. Our guest is the world's first humour engineer. Well, what's that, you ask? He teaches people how to get better results while having fun. He's worked with thousands of people in over 200 organisations, including Procter & Gamble, GE and Microsoft. He's a best-selling author, has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes and TEDx, and has delivered programs in over 50 states in the US, all 50 states, in 18 countries over 3 continents. Oh, and he loves the colour orange. And he's joining us all the way from New York City. Welcome to the show, Andrew Tarvin.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Oh, excited to have you on here. I heard your story on Chris Gellibo's Side Hustle School and thought this is just fascinating. So I'd love to start with that story. Your job title is Humour Engineer. So I'd love you to tell us a bit about yourself and how you ended up with that title.
Yeah, so for people that are surprised by the title, it didn't exist before I made it up as far as I know, and that's how I know I'm the leading humor engineer in the world because I'm the only one. But it is basically an intersection of my background. So I have a degree in computer science and engineering. I've always been an engineer. I've always been obsessed with efficiency. So I went to the Ohio State University here in the States, got a degree in computer science and engineering, started working at Procter & Gamble as an IT project manager after I graduated. And when I was at P&G, I started to realize that there was a difference between being efficient and being effective. You know, I was always obsessed with how do I get the most results with the minimum amount of work. And I realized that you can't be efficient with humans because humans have emotions and feelings and they get sick and tired and they have to eat and sleep and all these other things that robots and computers don't have to do. And I didn't really have the skill set that I needed to be effective with humans, right? Because we have to be effective. And so luckily for me in college, I started doing improv and stand-up comedy. My best friend wanted to start an improv comedy group. He needed people and forced me to join. And fell in love with improv. And while I was at P&G, started to realize that the same skills that I was learning to be effective as an improviser on stage were actually some of the same skills that were helping me to be more effective with my teams and with my resources and all that kind of thing. So I started to explore that intersection of humor in the workplace and improv in business, and ultimately ended up making a company that was my side hustle for a while, became my full-time hustle, my full-time job. And that's what falls under kind of humor engineer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. I'm interested in hearing about this improv school. When you first started improvisation, because I've actually done it in high school and it's pretty scary. Was it easy for you or did it take you a few months to really get into your groove?
No, it for sure took me some time because I will say that, you know, when we first started, we were not very good, like at all, because we had no formal training. We were just some college kids, and a couple of the people in the group had a little bit of improv experience, but mostly we watched Whose Line Is It Anyway and tried to repeat what we saw. And so we weren't very good. And then also for me, particularly, like I was never the class clown or the, life of the party type person. I'm an introvert. My senior year in high school, I was voted teacher's pet. Like I was very much more on the academic side. And so when I first started doing improv, I was nervous the entire day before a show to the point that like I couldn't eat anything. And then after a few shows, after some practice and doing it a little bit, then I couldn't eat for the entire half day. But I could eat in the morning, but not in the afternoon. And then it was I could eat lunch, but then I couldn't eat, the 2 hours before a show. And now it's to the point that it's like I could be in the middle of eating and someone be like, go and do an improv show. And I'd be like, oh, okay, great. And same thing with stand-up. It became a process that I learned where I was constantly nervous. But as I got better and better at it as I did it more and more. I became more and more comfortable with it.
When you started incorporating humour, what was it that you were bringing into, say, a meeting? And then what were you noticing with people in the meeting? Was there a great response first up, or are people a bit sort of confused and shocked and saying, hey, this isn't the way that we operate in corporate America?
Yeah, I mean, I do think people were a little bit surprised. And the way that I introduced humor was, at meetings, I would start every meeting as a project manager with like an interesting question. Nothing like too extreme in terms of humor or anything like that, but a simple question like, everyone go around the room and answer, what's the first thing you remember buying with your own money? Or what is something true for you that you don't think is true for anyone else in this room? Or, just different basic questions like that, get to know you type questions. And what we found is that as we got to know each other more as humans, we started to have better team dynamics. We started to respect each other more. And because the thing is that when we think of humans as resources and simply resources of people who are doing work for us, we forget that they are humans. And that sometimes maybe they're a little bit late in getting back to you, not because they secretly hate you and don't want to make your job harder, but because they had a sick child at home, or they've been going through something that's challenging, or work is really stressful for them. And so by just bringing back a human element into the meetings, it helped us to improve our relationships and I feel like get better results. And so it started small. I started to also, in my own presentations, I started to add a little bit of humor, add more images. I remember reading kind of one of those like fact or trivia things that Alfred Hitchcock would put himself in almost every single one of his movies, even if it was like just in the background or his silhouette or something like that. So I was like, that sounds kind of cool. I'm gonna do that for my presentation. So I started adding an image of me into every single one of my presentations. And some of them were obvious and some of them were hidden. It became kind of a game for the people in my meetings to see, okay, when is the picture of Andrew going to show up? And so it was small things like that. So it was never anything that was too extreme. And I think people, they started to open up more. They started to like it. People started to actually attend my meetings because they knew that it was going to be fun and engaging. And I got positive feedback from people that they were saying that, hey, I just want to let you know that I really enjoy coming to your meetings, or I enjoy the humor that you use, or because you've started to do this, I've started to use humor in my meetings as well.
Oh, wow. You must have been really pleased with that knock-on effect. I mean, that's how you really create a culture change in any sort of company, just by starting something organically like that.
And I think that, and just kind of build on that, because one of the things that I think is important about when I'm working with organizations, I'm talking to them as individuals, not as, hey, as a CEO or as the senior leaders go out and incorporate humor, though I do that. But I also talk to anyone at any individual level. It's like you decide every single day how you're going to approach your day. So, you can make the choice to use humor. And like you said, that I kind of liken it to a zombie apocalypse, right? That change is kind of like a zombie apocalypse. It starts with a patient zero, a single person with either a brain-eating disease or hopefully more likely a good idea that they start to do. And that goes out and that spreads to a couple of people that they interact with, and that spreads to a couple more and spreads to a couple more. And then ultimately you've changed an entire culture. But it comes down to individual choices that they make. And I think that's a key point that you kind of like pulled out there.
Yeah, I think that's really empowering for people at all levels in an organization, that you can actually, this is in your circle of control and you can influence people just by, changing little things. Like, great example of hiding images of yourself in presentations. I might start doing something like that. When you did that the first time, was it very obvious, or did people pick it out, or was it over the course of, say, 3 or 4 presentations they were starting to notice this pattern of you sneaking in selfies or whatever it was of you?
Yeah, it was over the course of some presentations. I mean, the first picture of me was very obvious. It was, I think, a picture of me as a kid. And that's one of the ways to immediately, I feel like, almost get an audience on your side, is you show a picture of you either as an adorable child or, one of our blunder year type photos where it's like, I can't believe I used to that my mom let me go to school like this, type pictures. And you kind of immediately create a little bit of a human bond, because everyone has those embarrassing pictures or everyone has those cute photos. So the first couple were kind of like that. And then people started to, some of the presentations were a little bit tough for me to kind of justify them in kind of a funny way. And that's when people started to pick up like, wait a minute, there's one in every single one of these presentations. And that's where it became fun.
That's cool. Now, you said that people really noticed this and they started implementing it. Some people chose to. You're under lots of time pressures, and sometimes it's hard just to get your information together before a meeting, let alone be innovative or include something like humour and make that extra effort. Do you find that people, were they responding to the challenge and just doing it because they saw the results, or were certain people still kind of like, no, I don't have time for this. I'm just going to stick to the traditional method and just throw a bunch of text onto my PowerPoint slides?
Yeah, I mean, certainly people still kind of, and even with trainings that I do, there's some people that will stick to kind of the way that they've always learned it. And that's where, though humor is a lot about what I talk about, what I'm really talking about is effectiveness. So that's, my training company is a training company in human effectiveness. And you recognize that, yes, creating a presentation that has more images and adds a little bit of humor isn't as efficient, but it is a lot more effective. And so as someone who wants to get results, right, as an engineer, that's what I'm all about, is solving problems and getting results. I'm willing to take a little bit more time to do it so that in the long run, I'm actually saving time. Because if I go into a meeting and I use a little bit of humor and I get people to pay attention and they actually remember the message, that means that I don't have to send as many follow-up emails. It doesn't mean that I have to do another presentation where I give basically exact same talk. And for me, at least, I do think that over the long run, I've saved actually a lot more time because I've been more effective rather than just focusing on efficiency.
So in these workshops that you run based on human effectiveness, what kind of strategies do you teach people that come to your workshops?
Well, a lot of it starts with, you have to understand the why. You have to understand the why in terms of what you're working towards and what results you want. And even with humor. So when I train on humor, I talk about a humor map. That stands for your medium, audience, and purpose. So medium being, how are you going to execute your humor? Is it in an email or in a presentation? Who is your audience? Like, what do they know? What do they need? What do they expect? And what is your relationship to them? Because your relationship to them dictates some of the type of humor that you can use, because you recognize the humor that you can get away with a good friend is different than what you would get away with someone that you've met for the first time. And then finally, and most importantly, is the purpose. What is your reason for using humor? So I don't teach humor just because it's fun. It's nice that it's fun, but I teach it because it works. And so are you trying to use humor because you want to get people to pay attention? Or are you using it so they'll remember something longer? Are you using it so that you'll build a better relationship with them, or that you'll help them be able to solve problems more effectively? Like, what is that specific goal you're going for? And then from there, you can pick the right style of humor. So that's kind of what I'm teaching. And that's the key to effectiveness, because it doesn't matter how fast you run if at the start of the race you run in the wrong direction. And so if you don't have that direction, and if you don't have that overarching kind of goal that you're going after, then you can't really be effective.
So once your participants, they've mapped out, that's not really a pun, it's just a direct use of the word.
Yeah.
Once they've mapped out the medium, audience and purpose, then how do you end up choosing the style? Does it really relate to your personal brand, or is it like, okay, here are some funny images, cat memes always get a laugh, or do you refer it back to the person that's presenting? Is it just up to them to figure it out, or are there some strategies?
Yeah, I mean, I give some recommendations based on some different styles of humor that do work for different purposes, different reasons. But yeah, it ultimately comes down to, your sense of humor, right? Your sense of humor is your ability to appreciate humor and what you find funny. And that dictates your skill of humor, because that's what you're going to talk about. For me, I love puns. So at the end of, another way that I started to introduce humor pretty early on at P&G was at the end of every single one of my weekly status update meeting or emails, I would send a couple of puns based on the subject matter. And a lot of times I'd sometimes get emails back that were like, hey, this was a good pun. A lot of times they were, hey, this was a terrible joke, kind of like in a playful way. But what it told me is that people were actually opening my email and at least scrolling to the bottom of it to see it. Yeah. And that's for me, I love puns and I love creating puns. But if you're if you're not a very good joke teller, but you're pretty good at telling stories, then maybe you're going to be more inclined to tell stories, or maybe you don't really feel like you have the skill set yet to create a lot of the humor yourself. The other thing that I talk about is that you don't even have to be the creator of humor. You can be the shepherd of humor. you can find interesting pictures, and as long as if they're Creative Commons, then you can put them in your presentation. Or if you find a TED talk that you like, then you can share that out with people. Or if if you're listening to this podcast and you think that it's great and you want your team to start to embrace humor a little bit more, share this podcast with them. There's a lot of things that you can do that way to get started. And so it's a balance of what is your sense of humor and your style and what do you know, and then also what are some strategies that maybe work really effectively for getting people to pay attention or for remembering something longer.
At the beginning of every sort of shift for our workers, they do something called a pre-start talk, and that's where the person gets up and talks about what's happening that day, assigning people to tasks, that sort of thing. And I sort of liken it to the pre-flight safety briefing in terms of everyone. It's kind of like Groundhog Day, same information's retained. So something like this, even bringing in a joke, a pun, a funny image, whatever it is, just to mix it up would really help in, I guess, switching the people on and actually listening to that. In your example, we mentioned that at the end of your email, you wrote a pun. And I was going to ask you a question about online learning environment. So sometimes it might be easier when you're face-to-face in a workshop to introduce humour, but I guess that's one strategy that would work online when running online training. Is there anything else that you could incorporate online? Is it the same sort of thing in terms of like a funny image here and there, or the timing of delivering some content?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think one thing I want to touch upon the idea that you said of like, if you have these, as you have these pre-start meetings, I think one of the valuable things about consistently using humor is that it changes people's expectations and their behavior, and usually in a good way. So like I said, when I started using humor in meetings, people actually wanted to come to my meetings because they knew they were going to be more fun. When I started using humor in emails, people actually wanted to read my emails because they knew that they're going to have a little bit more fun. And so if you take something that is, people have to go to or they have to experience, and then you started to each person doing it added their own style of humor to these pre-start meetings. What it's going to do is it's going to change people's behavior to actually look forward to the meeting, because they're going to be like, all right, yeah, I'm going to have to hear this information, but I'm interested to hear what joke this person shares or what story they share or what question they ask. And so that's part of the value of doing a sustained humor kind of program instead of a one-off, but actually having humor consistently. It changes people's kind of perceptions and engagement long term. So I think that's a great example of an area where humor could be added. To kind of jump to the online area, you're exactly right that different styles of humor, as you change your medium, are going to work. And so certainly puns could work. Online learning, I think images. Yeah. That's a great opportunity for using humor in that context because it is something visual. And a lot of times with online learning, you start to listen to someone and it's easy to, alt tab or command tab into a different program or kind of daydream or look at something else. But if you're having images that are interesting and humorous, then people are going to stick back to the actual screen itself because like, oh, I want to see what other interesting image comes up. So those are, there's other techniques in terms of storytelling as well as, in the training when we talk about if your goal is to help people remember something longer, then that's a great opportunity for association. So connecting whatever it is that you're training to something else that's interesting or that people will know about. So for example, when I was at P&G, I was tasked with my leadership wanted me to teach a project management course that was typically 3 days for employees. It's like, can you do a 3-hour version of that for interns? Like give them the bare basics so that they can actually walk away with it. And so with that, I wanted to create an association. And ultimately, me and another guy decided to associate project management with like a wedding. And so if you understand the basic setup of wedding, you can understand basic understanding of project management. So the engagement is like the project charter. And the parents are like the stakeholders, and there's a schedule, and there's a budget, and the vows are like the scope of what you're talking about. And then we would also end with a joke that 50% of both end in failure.
That's great.
So it's like you give this extended analogy, and now people could be like, oh, what was that? What's a project charter? Oh, yeah, it's like the engagement. So that's what starts the project and says, this is what we're going to try to do.
So you talk about you had to condense this workshop into 3 hours. just moving on to your book, which is over 501 strategies to use humour in the workplace. I'm interested in knowing which one of those do you receive the most feedback on. People have written back to you and said, hey, this works really well, or maybe it's been controversial. I don't know. What have you received? What's the number one that you've heard about?
I think one that people really like, but is sometimes hard for them to grasp, is incongruity within subject lines. So I think the most popular kind of section is probably email, because we spend so much time in email. And so one way that you can encourage people to use to open emails is to use humor in the subject line. And so I think people are really interested in that, but it's a little bit of a challenge for them sometimes. And so since writing the book, I've gotten more clear on how to do that through some simple kind of incongruity exercises, where it's like, think of the normal subject line that you're going to do, and then pick one or two words and find a unique or interesting way to say those words. So, for example, when I used to send out weekly status reports, instead of calling them a weekly status report, tried to find a more interesting way to say that. I worked with a lot of engineers, so they tended to skew on the nerdier side. So I went with project managers, logs, star date, and then whatever the actual calculated start date was. So a little ode to Star Trek, just to make things a little bit interesting. So I think that's one that I've gotten more clear on how to do. And then the other one that I get a lot of feedback on that I don't know if people actually do, but they seem to remember it, is that I do suggest that if you are going through email and you're starting to get bored, to just start reading the different emails with a different accent in your head.
I'm actually going to work later today, so I'm gonna make it a thing in mind when I get into the office, send an email, and I'm going to change that subject title and see what the reaction is. Might even start including some puns, and we'll see where we go.
Yeah, and that's the key to it is to recognize that, you know, sometimes people, because one, like, people think that they're either able to or not, right? You think that you're born able to use humor. But the reality is that humor is a skill, and that means it can be learned. And I know that because I'm someone who's had to learn how to use it. And it really starts then with a choice and trying things out, and trying a handful of things that are within your comfort zone, recognizing that, yeah, when you're first starting out, maybe it's only one or two things that you're doing to add humor. And maybe it is, like you said, just an email, or maybe it's just listening to a comedy podcast on your way home to relieve some stress. And it starts small, but then as you start to think about it more and you see more opportunities, it starts to become more second nature, and you start to add it. So it doesn't feel like you have to do as much prep time for executing some of these humor ideas.
Oh, look, I'll send you some feedback if I get any interesting responses. Actually, what comedy podcast do you recommend, if any?
It kind of depends on your style. There's, plenty that are talking about comedy and how people create comedy. So, Mark Maron's WTF podcast, he has a lot of comedians on, and they end up talking a little bit about their process and how they create comedy. So I find that fascinating. Comedy Bang Bang is more of kind of a sketch is very, very popular with people, and a good way to listen. And then there's certain personalities. The cool thing is when you can find a personality that you really like. So if you like the rant style and are okay with adult language, then someone like Bill Burr, who just has a podcast where he just talks about things in the news and stuff, that can be an interesting way to listen to it, because not only do you get to laugh and that kind of thing, but you can also start to see what are they starting to do to create humor. What are they saying, and how are they, by watching comedy, you can actually become, I think, as you start to study it a little bit more, you can start to pick up on things that can help you to be more comedic yourself.
Yeah, so you do believe there's really strong parallels with being a comedian and also facilitating a workshop?
I think so. Well, I mean, I still do stand-up to prepare for speaking events, because I think that stand-up will be one of the hardest forms of public speaking you'll ever do. And so my thought is that just like an athlete goes into a weight room and stresses their muscles far beyond than what they're going to actually use in their sport, it's the same way with doing something like stand-up, is that if you get comfortable doing that, or get comfortable doing improv, doing a presentation where you have slides behind you and the expectation is not for you to be funny becomes a lot easier.
Oh, I can't even imagine getting up on a stand-up stage. Wow, that's huge. So talking about big moments on stage, so you delivered a TEDx speech at Ohio State University. I was just flying back from Sydney the other day, and I was watching it in the airport and just laughing. It was really funny. When preparing that, how much time did you put into actually getting that all together and then memorizing that speech? It's about 20 minutes long. Yeah, how much lead-up time did you give yourself to do that?
Yeah, so typically that one's a little bit hard to remember because it's a little bit further. I also did a new TEDx talk for Texas A&M that was in April of last year. Yeah. And so that one's a little bit more present in my mind. And so what happens there is typically with TEDx, you get about a 4-month lead time where, you get selected as a speaker and then you have 4 months until then. And they have some coaching and stuff. And the thing that I've realized for me is that I joke that I don't procrastinate, but I believe in just-in-time productivity. Mm-hmm. And so I don't do something until I have to, right? It's an element of the Parkinson's law, which says a work expands to the amount of time allotted for it. Yeah. And so that's partly where stand-up helps me. So 4 months leading up to knowing that I was going to do this talk, I booked myself for stand-up shows. And so I went and just worked on jokes and different ideas of what I thought I was going to tell and explore the idea of the skill, because the TAMU one is on the skill of humor and how we can learn to be funny. And practice it and reps. And then as I got closer and closer, I started to book, with friends, I said, hey, can I come in and talk to your team about the skill of humor so that I can practice this? And so I don't know the actual number of hours that I put into it, but it was definitely, I know I did, I think at least 5 or 6 run-throughs of the 20-minute version of the talk with private groups just to get feedback. Sure. And then I did a bunch of other stand-up shows to get there. And TEDx is a very specific environment where if you're doing that, that's probably going to be more rehearsed than almost any other thing that you're going to do. But a general presentation that you're doing for your employees or a speaking engagement that you're doing, what I recommend is that you get to the point that you are extemporaneous. That maybe the first time when you're first creating your first draft, you write it all out. And then as you write it out, then you can go back and there's certain things you can look for to add humor to it. So anytime that you have a list, you can, look at turning that into a comic triple. And every time you express an emotion, you might give kind of allegory for another time that you might experience that emotion in a funny way. Yeah. Anytime you're teaching a point, you might use an association. So like for me, there's a structure and some triggers that you can use these tools within humor. So it's a little bit less kind of like, hey, make this funny, but more strategic behind that. And then after you have that draft, you kind of build it into bullet points or, as stand-up comedians, we call them a set list. And you have a name for each piece of your bit. And then you practice it, not worrying about getting things right or wrong, but just about getting the over ideas across. Because when it comes to a presentation, the only time that an audience knows you messed up is if you tell them you messed up. And instead, if you kind of skip something, you can bring it back a little bit later, or you can decide to ignore it completely if it's not all that big a deal. And in the moment when you're actually presenting, thinking about it less about being right or wrong to whatever your script said, instead being more extemporaneous about it. And 2, more about how do I give the best performance right now in this moment based on kind of how well I've prepared.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that it's actually really important to over-rehearse. So then it seems like you've come across really natural, which sounds counterintuitive, but I delivered a similar speech. It was only 5 minutes last year. Got there and then it just came out effortlessly. And I did sort of move things around in it, but I had worked and planned so hard that I could, rather than just winging it on the spot. So yeah, that's really good advice.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, and Seinfeld talks about, he says that when he's learning his material, he wants to be so rehearsed that if someone was like slapping him in the face, he would still be able to tell his jokes. And that's a bit extreme for me, but I think of it in the same thing that I should be able to do basic tests. So I'll work on my speech either like when I go for a run or if I'm like washing the dishes or that kind of thing. These simple tasks where you're kind of slightly distracted are great times to actually work on your presentation as well, to know that you can be, that you can not only be, it so well that you're delivering it while also still kind of thinking about other things that might be going on.
Yeah, because I was exactly the same thing, walking the dogs, driving, just talking to myself. Cool strategies. Just interesting, you talk about scripting it and writing your bullet points and then thinking about those associations. Do they come to you in the moment, or are you sort of in the shower or, out one night and you think, oh, geez, that's a really great link to what I'm trying to present in this speech? Does it just come to you at times where you least expect it, or do you sort of just plan it and write it down as it flows?
It's a little bit of both. And I would say that, so there's a couple of things that when I train on, if you want to be a comedian or if you want to learn from comedians what they do, there's a couple of things that all comedians do. And number one, just about every comedian, unless they have a fantastic memory, almost every comedian has a humor notebook. And that might be a physical notebook, or it might be, Evernote on your phone or the Notes app and, iPhone or Android or whatever. But they have something where when they're in the shower, when they're walking along, they have this idea or someone says something to them, they're like, oh, that's interesting. And that's what humor is, right? That initial piece of humor is just kind of that exploration of like, that's interesting. And so then they write it down, right? You write that down in your notebook, and then you might explore it then. But then a lot of times what you do is when you do have time, when you sit down, you're like, okay, I want to explore some humor, or I'm working on this piece for my talk, or I want to tell a story. Then you go into your humor notebook, and that gives you your inspiration. That gives you ideas to play with. And then the second thing that comedians or humorists do is that they write a lot. And so within comedy, we say there's something called the rule of 90, which says that 90% of what you write is going to be crap. Only 10% is really going to be the stuff that's really, really good, that's going to get laughs on stage or get laughs from the audience or in an email or whatever. And so the way we write is we build off of those own ideas. And so UCB, Upright Citizens Brigade, an improv school here in New York and LA, has a really great phrase to codify this idea of writing. And that says that once you have that interesting idea in your humor notebook, you can look at it and think, if this is true, what else is true? Or what else could be true? And so you use that as a prompt to kind of start to write and explore different ideas of possibilities. And then the last thing that comedians do is they get it on stage, in the sense they get it out there and they test it to see. And so for comedians, that is actual stage time. But for people that don't do comedy, it could be sharing a couple of thoughts with friends to see what their reaction is, or tweets, right? So I tweet almost every day a pun or one-liners just to force myself to get stuff out there.
Yeah.
And then usually at the end of the year, I'll go back and look at, all the tweets that I had and what had the best engagements, what had the most retweets and likes, or Facebook posts, what had comments to it, and which ones do I just like. And then I'll pull those out, and I will sometimes use those in stand-up, or I'll find ways to use those in speaking engagements and stuff like that. So I'd say those three things kind of all combine together that make it so that it's a balance of, someone said, I don't remember who it is that the difference between, say, a professional and an amateur or hobbyist is that a professional is able to work even when they don't feel inspired.
Yeah.
And the way that you do that is by giving yourself structure, by doing certain types of exercises, and then giving yourself forms of inspiration, like ideas that you've captured in a humor notebook.
Yeah, I guess by doing that tweet a day, you're sort of developing a discipline and a habit. And look, at the end of the year, you got 365 puns a day. You could probably start one of those daily calendars after that. How do you even think of a pun a day? Do you sort of batch it and on the weekend go, right, here's 7 for the week and I'll just schedule these out? Or do you actually just every day get inspired by something that's going on? That's incredible.
I do. It depends on the week, and I do a little bit of both. Sometimes I'll sit down and be like, let me write a bunch of these, because like you kind of mentioned, as you do it more and more, you start to notice more and more humor. It's just like, when a friend of yours buys a certain car and then suddenly you see that car everywhere.
Yeah.
It's just changing your level of attention. And so as you start writing humor, you start to see humor in more places. Or as you start to do storytelling, like if you start to get into the Moth or other storytelling shows, you start to realize like, oh, wait, this random experience at the grocery store could actually be a pretty interesting story.
Yeah.
So it changes that. But for me, on a daily basis, it's more of like, what did I do today? Or what did I experience today? Or if I'm writing puns, sometimes I like doing crossword puzzles. So then I'll look through the crossword puzzle and look at words and like see certain words and be like, oh, there's 2 meanings to that word. Can you make a pun out of it? Or like the tweet today, and I don't know if it's actually good or not, but it just went up like probably 30 minutes ago, was my mom sent me an article about the 10 most confusing emoticons or emojis. And so when I was thinking of the tweet for today, I was like, oh, what's related to emojis? What's something that I could say about emojis? And so I started to explore it. And then like my thought for today, and again, I don't know if it's good or not, is that, people make fun of emoticons, but the truth is that they introduced emotions to a whole slew of engineers who had to program them into apps.
That's good. Yes, I'll like that one. That's good.
Yeah, so you can like that, and then I'll know.
That's great.
Right, and so like that's just the... that's a process from today of it's what happened in my life that I can kind of look back on and explore to see if there's anything interesting to talk about.
As presenters and facilitators, we definitely want to bring in stories. We all know that stories really help in terms of reinforcing a message, but it's hard to sort of look back on your life and think of that moment that would reinforce a point. So the notepad and just taking note of everyday things that happen, and then maybe in 3 to 6 months' time, you think, wow, that could actually be useful in demonstrating this. is a much easier process for sure.
Yeah, and there's different techniques to it. So I work with speakers sometimes to like how do they add humor to their programs, and so sometimes you can the hardest way to add humor is to sit down and be like, all right, try to be funny. Much easier is to look at existing content that already exists and then go through it and look for these triggers, like I said, of like to say, oh, okay, because I've done this is maybe a good spot for this type of humor. Or the other thing that you can do is take a story that, if there's a story that your family always tells about you that is appropriate and kind of funny, think about what lessons are in there and then see if there are ways that you can incorporate it into your talk. And so I've done that sometimes where it's like, here's this bit that works really well, that's really funny. How can I then connect that to talking about this particular subject? And sometimes it's easier to go that direction with something funny and making it relevant than it is to come up with something from scratch.
And on that note, what is the best advice that you could offer someone that's turning from a technical expert and they want to start sharing their knowledge with others? They want to be a first-time facilitator. What would you tell them?
I would say that certainly taking an improv class is hugely beneficial in facilitation, right? Because facilitating is different than speaking in the sense that speaking is a little bit more like stand-up. Facilitating is a little bit more like improv. And so I think improv is incredibly helpful in learning applied improvisation, and how you debrief and everything is there, I think is helpful. And the biggest thing, like any skill, is practice and reps. And the beautiful thing about taking an improv class or a train the trainer type training is that you get to practice these skills that are very valuable, but you practice them in a safe environment where the stakes are incredibly low. Like, you don't want to like read about facilitation and then go and facilitate your first workshop with someone where the stakes are higher and it's a paying client or that kind of thing, right? Like, if you can take an improv class and get those reps of being comfortable thinking on your feet and reacting to people's thoughts and sharing ideas in a safe way, then not only do you retain those ideas longer, but you've also then practiced it and you've built your skill up.
Yeah, I think it's all about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because I know when I deliver workshops, there's times where I know the content, I know the audience, so it's pretty easy, but then other times where one of those things will change, the audience is a lot bigger, I don't really know who they are. And do you ever get nervous delivering anymore, or completely confident every time?
I get nervous every now and then. So I just did a talk in Baltimore there's an organization here in the U.S. called the National Speakers Association. There's versions of it everywhere, and there's a conference on the future of speaking, which is like, what do we see like speaking looking like in 10 years? And so I gave a talk that was very different than my traditional style, because normally I'm speaking, but this was, because it was the future, I was like, I want to show and not tell. And so I did a scene with someone else acting as a voice assistant of basically what I think content creation will be like in the future with creative machines. And I was nervous for that because it was a different style of presentation. And it went really, really well. People are really positive about it. A bunch of people came up to me afterwards and like, you need to invent this thing that you're talking about, because I want to use it. I want this structured creative process that I can, go back and forth with the machine to help me be more creative.
Yeah.
So that's partially what I'm working on, but it came through. It was a good nervous. It was a good, excited nervous. And, the rehearsal kind of certainly helped, as well as the thought process of, I've done over 1,000 shows now between stand up and improv and over 500 events that like, I need to trust my ability to be able to react and change in this moment. And that definitely helped as well.
Oh, great. So apart from that, the voice assistant project, what else are you working on?
So I'm continuing to build out training programs. So with my training company, Humour That Works, the focus there is on building out specific workshops that solve very specific problems, because in the past I've focused more on the general why humor in the workplace is important. But what we're doing now with our workshops is working with smaller teams, 10 to 30 people, of a specific challenge that they have. So there's a stress management workshop, and there is a presentation workshop, and there's there's like a job satisfaction workshop, with the intent that they walk away with very actionable things that people can do, solving specific problems that particular team or workplace has. and the how that we do it incorporates humor and improvisation and that kind of thing. But building out those programs so that additional people facilitate them. So I'm not facilitating all of those. That instead I'm focusing more on keynote speaking and building out some of these creative tools and stuff like that, while other people are helping people solve these problems. Because that's that's what I love about it as an engineer, is that it actually gets results. And so I want to help people to not only embrace and have more fun at work, but for them to get better results while doing it.
Yeah, and look, we'd love to have you or whatever you preach down under. I think your humour really relates to the people in Australia, so it'd be great to have you down here sometime. Look, Andrew.
Yeah, we'll make it have to make it work. Now that I've done all 50 states, I want to do all the continents, and so I got to get there at some point.
Awesome. Be so good to see you down here. Thank you so much for all your advice, and I think the best thing about this conversation is that I could list at least 5 practical things I could implement straight away and that I can tell my colleagues about too. So love that you've provided some actionable tips. Finally, where can people find you?
Yeah, so they can find me on, if you're a fan of puns, you can follow me on Twitter. If you like more image-based stuff, you can follow me on Instagram. All of my social media is Drew Tarvin, so you can also follow me on Facebook. So DrewTarvin. We can post to that stuff. I have a newsletter through Humour That Works where every Friday send out something related to humor. Like a couple weeks ago, we broke down why the Tide ad was so humorous and so effective and immediately became meme-worthy. And talk about other things that are just kind of on people's mind to share people with that. And they can also find more either on specifically the humor side, humorthatworks.com, or more about me and the speaking at andrewtarvin.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew. You've learned a lot.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Have a great night.